This is Life Admin Life Hacks, a podcast that gives you techniques, tips and tools to tackle your life admin more efficiently, to save your time, your money and improve your household harmony.
I'm Dinah Roberts, an operations manager. My baby's starting high school next year. I feel so old.
I'm Mia Northrop, a researcher and writer whose first child is about to start her last year of primary school. Where does the time go?
This episode will help you prepare for the next school year, particularly when your child is starting at a new daycare or school.
Hello and welcome to Life Admin Life Hacks. Before we jump into today's topic, we wanted to say thank you to our latest reviewers, in particular Claire on Insta, who said, "Just listen to my Life Admin Life Hacks podcast yesterday. It's so great finding you and having so many to consume whenever I want." Well, thank you, Claire. We're so happy you found us.
We're passionate about freeing people from the tedium of life admin. So if you take away some helpful hints today, please pay it forward and leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts so others can find these useful resources too.
We also wanted to let you know that you can now pre-order our book, Life Admin Hacks, on Book Depository, Booktopia and Amazon. Each chapter gives you a reality check about an aspect of life admin, clarifies why you should bother tackling it to motivate you, suggests when is the best time to do it, and then shows you how to optimize it. The book comes out Jan 5, so if you want to kick off the new year with a new and improved approach to life admin, order it today. So let's get into today's ep. We surveyed our community to understand how they approach their life admin, their pain points, and which life events contributed the most to life admin tasks. And 1 in 3 of the survey respondents reported that their child starting at daycare or school generated a significant amount of life admin, and we can certainly relate.
So in this episode, we're going to talk about why transitions can be stressful, and so having an ordered approach to the admin associated can really help smooth the way. Some of the key life admin foundations you need to have humming to support all this new admin that floods in, particularly when you're starting at a new school, and our top hacks for saving time, money, and sharing the load.
So as each of your children start daycare and transition then to kindergarten and then primary school and then high school, it really is a time of transition that you have to plan for. And transitions are kind of hard. They're just hard for both parents and kids. You're letting go of the familiar, you're facing a new future, there's going to be new people, new routines, new ways of doing things. And a lot of people can feel vulnerable and uncertain about this. So as humans, really, we're hardwired to resist change, and this period can trigger that stress response. There's also can be that sense of loss when you think about what's coming next for your child. I know when my bubba was about to go to daycare after a year of maternity leave, I was like, oh my God, I can't believe this period is over. I can't believe she's now going to sort of enter into the system. It felt like this big shift. I knew I was going to miss her a lot and it would be a big change to our routine. So there was a little bit of that sense of loss. As much as I was excited about the freedom and the fact that I was going to go back to work and I was looking forward to that, there was a little bit of thought around, I wish I could stay in this zone a little bit longer. And I was a bit anxious about what's to come. Do you remember back then, Dinah, or is that just too far for you?
It's not that far ago. I do think that I felt quite anxious about it. And I think, I guess going back, I probably took a lot of that anxiety on for myself. And I guess if I could have my time again, I'd definitely share that more with my partner. And I think one of the things we were talking about before is how much people also can kind of create more of that anxiety by well-meaning people, particularly for your kids when they're starting primary school, saying, are you excited to be going to school next year? And if your kid's anxious, it's like the last thing you want them to ask. And it's like reliving the anxiety every time the question gets asked.
Yeah. You're right. I remember one of my kids was not excited about starting school at all. And the whole summer holidays preceding, people would say, where are you going to go to school and how exciting? What do you think? And who's going to be in your class? And I would be just doing that slicing movement of your hand across your neck, like cut the conversation. We're not talking about school until 5 minutes before it needs to happen.
Yeah, and I think I've even got that now with my son about to start high school. He's going to a school where he doesn't really have any friends. Every time someone sees him, they ask him, which of your friends are going to your high school? It's like, please, we don't need to go there. Please don't.
So obviously if you're feeling a little anxious about it, kids can pick up on that. You want to manage any uncertainty or anxiety they have as well. But, these transitions are also a beautiful opportunity to reach a new equilibrium. There's that sense of growth and renewal and excitement and fresh beginnings. Like my daughter can't wait to go to high school. She's feeling really optimistic about it. So it's a time when you can let go of some old beliefs or assumptions and really tune in to what's exciting and going to be fun about the situation. So we wanted to talk about this because as you're going through all of the logistics and the planning and the paperwork, there's going to be emotions. There's going to be your emotions, your family's emotions, your child's emotions, and you really need to be aware of both of those things. There's an ending happening, acknowledge that, let go, welcome the new, and celebrate.
Yeah, so I think when everyone's got these feelings of transition and anxiety, if you can really be nailing all of the admin associated with it, can just dial down one more potential trigger for things to get stressful and anxious. So I think starting early is super key. And I think that we're recording this episode in November because you already really need to have been started now, particularly if you're moving to a new school. I've already been to a parent information evening. I've already met with the school once. So really making sure that you're setting up the foundations, it's almost probably 6 months before the kids start school is crucial, because you slowly need to work through all of those things to make sure that you're hitting the ground running.
Yeah, and that preparation could just help the family face the transition with confidence and grace and avoiding any kind of panicked last-minute rush stuff, which never helps the situation. And obviously kids, if you've got kids that have sensory processing or ADD or ASD or anxiety or OCD, there's going to be extra challenges there with their emotional regulation and cognitive inflexibility. If you can make things predictable, routine, and, keep things in control so there's no surprises, all of this helps with that learning curve and hitting the ground running. So, Diane, when we're setting up, so the paperwork start coming, the information evenings start happening, where should we be starting?
So I think that the first thing is to, right from the very beginning, you're going to start to have things that you're thinking about in relation to the transition to school. And you might even start thinking about it years ahead. So think about setting up a dedicated checklist in your to-do list system that just is really approaching this topic, because there's going to be lots of things that you have to action, that you want to think about, that you might want to talk about with your child, talk about with their current teacher. And so having one central place where you can store all of that information makes it really useful over time to get that information out of your head, sort of stop that mental load of the things that you might wake up in the night thinking about, and having that central place for both you and your partner to put anything that they think of. And then it can start to be a long list of all the things that need to be done. And then you can either schedule time in to do those, move them to another to-do list. But having one central place will make it much easier for you to get those things out of your head.
Okay, yeah, I like that. Just setting up the spot for the brain dumping to start to happen.
Yeah, because the reality is there is a lot of things. And as we talk through all the things to think about, there's a lot. And some things are going to be really important to your family, others won't be. But making sure that you've put those all down will really make sure that you tackle them in the right order.
All right, so checklist is number one. What else we set up in advance?
Yeah, I think setting up a folder in your cloud storage system so that as soon as you start to receive documents, it might be signing enrollment forms or paying fees or uniform checklists or any of those documents that might come in via email, but having that folder ready to go makes it so much easier for you to file those things as they come in as a 2 minutes too easy task.
Yeah, I'm going to do that as soon as I get off this podcast with my daughter. All right, folder. I love that hack. What next?
Well, making sure that your password manager is humming, because the reality is you're going to get so many passwords with any new organization. You're going to have online portals. You're going to have potentially passwords for ordering uniforms. You might have for their technology. You might have their MyKey account or their public transport card. There's going to be lots of passwords. So making sure that you've got your password manager set up and that everyone's using it and it's shared. And if you've got a child who's a bit older, thinking about getting them used to using it. So it really makes that part of the transition super easy.
Yeah, so I know you said that you've got, because you've got kids at multiple schools. So there's 2 school portals, there's medical logins, there's uniform shops, there's various devices, the locker, they need passwords for their locker. You don't want to
Yeah, so
forget
actually
that.
it's kind of a hack that, often the high schools give their kids combination locks for their lockers, and teaching your kid to put their locker combo in their password manager so that when they come back after the school holidays and they've forgotten what their
Oh,
combo is,
yeah.
they don't have to line up at the office. And it's just one of those things about teaching them some organization skills. So highly recommend getting your kids to do that.
Yep, that's a great hack. I love that. It's like when you come back from work after holidays and you're like, what do I do again? And how do I use all my
That's right.
systems? Imagine just staring at your locker going, yeah, that was six whole weeks ago. A lifetime's happened since then.
We have really good time to think about making sure you've got all your form filling data set up in your password manager, because the reality is forms, and more forms. That's what school admin is all about. So really having all of the information in there around your GP, the Medicare number, these are the things that you're going to be repeating over and over again over years and years and years.
Yeah.
So do it once, set it up properly, and then it'll make all those forms that are going to come for the next 13, for 17 years so much easier to fill out.
Yeah, and our episode that is on password manager and form filling data suggests some of what that sort of high frequency data should be, along the lines of, as you said, Medicare number, Centrelink number, next of kin, and emergency contact people. And they're often asking for medical information such as their doctor, their closest doctor, things like that.
Yeah,
over and over. Okay, and we did also talk about the fact that it's useful to have a support system of other parents or people who their kid's going to be going to the same daycare or primary or secondary, and start to set up some of those informal communications networks.
Yeah, so WhatsApp groups, Facebook groups, often if you know a few people, you can get lots of intel about what pieces of uniform the kids actually wear, what sort of lunch boxes are kind of the go-to, and things like that, where you might buy secondhand uniforms, where you might buy school supplies. So having others to ask, ideally you want to try and find some who've got older kids at that same school because they've been around for a while, as well as some who will be in the same position as you are, so you can share the journey with them. So really thinking about getting that going early will be really helpful to help you navigate entering a new school.
Yeah. Any family or friends or colleagues who've navigated that stage, they're a font of wisdom, all the shortcuts.
Yeah. And I think the other thing to think about in terms of communications is you're going to get a lot of emails from this new school. So if you haven't already, it might be a really good opportunity to set up a dedicated life admin email address that you can have all of that communication go to. If you've got a partner, that you can agree how you're going to share the responsibilities of all of this email communication that's going to come in, newsletters, permission slips, etc., etc. So really thinking about, you might have enrolled the child some time ago with your own personal email address, but take the time to contact the school, maybe change that email address to one that's in neutral territory, because that's really helpful to start as you mean to go on.
Yeah, nice one. And you also talked about some of the traditions that are worth acknowledging and holding on to during that transition period.
Yeah, I know lots of people have traditions around the photos they like to take on the first day, or think about holding a little sheet of paper with, some things that remind you of what their child was like at the beginning of the school year. I've seen friends who've said, what they want to be when they grow up. So you can watch, what's my favorite TV show when I'm starting prep versus when I start, year 10, or any of those things. But it's kind of, if you think about that in advance, it really can mean that you're not having that to add as a stressful moment on the first day, even if it's just a photo of your child with their siblings or whatever it is.
Yeah.
If you know you want to do that, really think about it intentionally in advance, have it on your checklist, and then it'll be reminded, so it won't be a last minute rush.
Yeah, that's lovely. I'm remembering when my daughter started school, we've got a series of photos that she very proudly stood for and posed as we were leaving the house. So she just, actually, I'm remembering when we bought her uniform, she immediately got home and tried it on, and she wore it on Christmas Day and before school started. And then, my son, when he started school, there was no way there was going to be posing for photos on the first day of school. The nerves were too high. It was just not going to happen. So I got a snapshot of him maybe like a week later. It doesn't matter. He's still standing there in his uniform. It's fine finally looking excited and proud. And in 20 years, no one's going to remember that we actually took that photo a week later. We still sort of captured that beginning of that time. So I think about your own child and whether they're going to be up for that on the day or whether that's just going to be asking way too much.
And the final thing that I think you need to really think about in terms of your foundations is the cost. Now, obviously with daycare fees, the ongoing fees can be huge. But when we start to get into high school, it's not just any fees you might be paying, but it's uniforms, it's the technology. So different schools have different policies, but you might really need to be budgeting in advance for, laptop computers or iPads, and often the school books also can, run into many hundreds of dollars. So really making sure that you've allowed sufficient money in your budget to pay for those. If you really need to be thinking about being cost conscious, setting aside enough time that you can do the bargain hunting around secondhand uniforms or secondhand books.
Yeah. And even things like excursions and camps, all of those are on top of the normal fees you pay. So yes, it's worth
plus.
Even daycare, when they have little incursions, people come to visit them or they take them somewhere. Sometimes there's costs involved. So now we're going to sort of step through what these transitions look like once your child is going into daycare or primary or secondary. So we'll go sort of chronological order. And I think one of the things to keep in mind is that while some things might change in the day, there are other elements and activities in the routine that can stay consistent. So it's worth having a think about, all right, what's our daily morning and evening routines? What's going to stay the same? What's going to shift? How can we keep some kind of continuity and retain some kind of structure so it's not completely different and a bit sort of blindsiding? And you might need to preview what the new routine is going to look like and have countdowns and timeframes to help people emotionally prepare. If you've got one of those launch pads at home where your kids' backpack and whatever gear they need to get out of the house is in a certain zone, this is where you might put a weekly schedule with visual cues if your kids can't read yet about what's going to happen each day, so that when you're getting prepared in the morning, everyone knows, all right, this is what's happening on this day. We're off to daycare, who's picking up, who's dropping off, and here's all the gear that needs to get you out the door. So, with daycare, depending on where you are, you might have been on a waiting list when the kid was born to actually get in there. So that's when the paperwork starts and the research needs to start. You would have visited local places, put their name down, and then filled in perhaps a waiting list form and then enrolment forms when they actually get a place. And that will include things about not just your address and phone number and stuff, but stuff around the kids' sleeping patterns and their emotional and social preferences and family circumstances and their comfort items. So be prepared to fill in that kind of information. They also want to know about anything to do with food allergies and toiletrying and what they're interested in doing and their preferred activities.
Yeah, and I think that's where you should start thinking about adding to your to-do list to find a second comfort item. So ideally the identical copy of the comfort item before you let it loose into daycare. Because there's so many stories of the, precious blankie being lost at daycare and going home in the wrong kid's bag. Oh, it's nightmare stuff.
Yeah, and it's not unusual to get the message from the daycare. Has anyone seen so-and-so's precious blah? It went missing and, that kid ain't sleeping until so-and-so is returned. So, yes, great advice. You'll also need to show your immunisation status for your child at most daycares, and you can download that from MyGov. If your child isn't fully immunised, you can consult your GP if you need some catch-up before they need to attend. You'll find that most daycares and childcare centres have a parent handbook, and these are often on their website, and this will specify the hours of operation. It'll have a calendar if there's any annual closures, so you can schedule in those days. It'll spell out things like their direct debit and how the childcare benefit works. So depending on what kind of subsidy you're eligible for, you will get some kind of rebate off your childcare fees via Centrelink. So make sure that you can log into Centrelink, you know what your CRN is, you know what your child's CRN is, and then you won't get charged the full fees.
And one of the other things to really think about is getting a working with children check, because you'll need one of those if you want to be able to volunteer. So go to your state government website. Usually just a trip to the post office is all that's needed. But getting on top of that well before you might want to volunteer so that at the last minute, you're not scrambling.
That's right. They can be real. They're very strict about that. So you can't help out in the rooms unless you have one of those. Another thing to think about is the dress code and wardrobe for your childcare centre. So usually the kids will spend time outside every day, regardless of the weather. They need sun smart clothes. I know our daycare didn't allow kids to have bare shoulders. So if the kids wanted to wear like tank tops or dresses with little straps, they had to wear something underneath, so they didn't want them to get sunburnt. And on the flip side, they didn't want anyone in thongs. I feel like they said no open-toed shoes. They wanted the kids to be able to run around and not drop stuff on their feet. But also they were outside. If it was raining, they would still get outside for some nature time and some play. So we had to invest in raincoats and gumboots and jackets. So you want to do that shopping ahead of time and just know that. Take a look at your kids' wardrobe. If they don't have clothes that can get destroyed, basically, if they come home covered in paint, covered in dirt, it's a lot of play. It's fun. Make sure that they're the right clothes that you don't mind coming home like that every day, and that you're going to have to put spare clothes in their little backpack.
Yeah. I think one of the other things to think about is, in advance, adding your new schedule into that family shared calendar, because often kids won't be going 5 days a week to either Daycare. And if they're going to a community kinder program, they might be even going strange hours. So thinking about putting that in your schedule early so that everyone's aware of that change in schedule and that everyone's got visibility of it, because emergencies might come up. The other parent or might need to pick up in an emergency. So making sure that everyone's aware of where to find the schedule and it's highly visible. And I think the other thing is making sure that you add anyone that might ever need to pick up your child to the emergency contact list, because things happen. My car broke down once and I had to call on a friend who lived nearby who I'd never thought I would have to call upon to pick up my child. So, having a long list of people who could potentially pick your child up in an emergency, think very widely in that list. Don't be narrow in your thinking.
Yeah. Relatives, neighbours, other parents who are going to be at the daycare, put them all on the list. Yep. And that's a good point around the schedule. It's sometimes useful to understand what the centre's schedule is going to look like. So when do they do meals and playtime and nap time, and start to replicate some of this at home to get used to that routine if it's relevant for your kid's age.
Yeah, definitely.
You might also want to get out books from the library or buy some books and stories about starting daycare and making friends and how it's going to be to get your kid excited about it. And you will go to do an orientation program. That needs to go on the schedule. You'll be meeting the educators and other parents. When you start, usually it starts with short visits. So you might take your child and they'll go into the room and you'll hang out in the foyer. Bring something to do while you're hanging out in the foyer. Like, not bring your phone, do some 10-minute time killer tasks, but bring a book, bring something, because you'll just be sitting there. And then you'll graduate to shorter days, building up to a full day perhaps. And you need to plan what you're going to do on those days to both make the most of that time and also not be at home just worrying and fretting what your child's doing at daycare. I really remember the first time we had to do that. I didn't plan anything and I kind of got home and I was like, oh, I'm home alone. This hasn't happened for a very long time. What will I do? And I was just squandered. And then I got my act together after that, and I was going to the movies and doing all these things that I hadn't done for a very long time. So think in advance and plan that in advance.
And then I think as you get really close to the actual start, thinking about that lead up and making sure that, the week advance, that you plan your schedule so that it's calm, that everyone's going to bed on time, particularly if you're coming off the summer break, so that you're, getting your schedule sorted, but also thinking about having all those labels ordered well in advance, because everything needs to be labeled, and making sure that you're working your way through labeling anything that might end up at daycare, and setting up a really good system for their bag with the things that they might need to take, particularly if they're needing nappies or formula, and having a system that both you and your partner know about who's responsible for topping supplies up so that the mental load doesn't fall just to one of you.
Yeah. At that stage, I had a checklist, just a paper checklist that was stuck on the door of the kids' wardrobe. So that had the checklist of what needed to get packed in the daycare backpack. And when you're in the morning, when you're tired and you're just trying to get out the door, I consulted that list every day and made sure things were in there. It was very useful.
Yeah, it's a great idea.
So once your kid starts at daycare, you'll probably be signing them in and out using tablets. So there's these parent communication apps, there's tablets. Again, These need to go in your password manager so you can remember what they are. And
Yep.
the other admin thing to note for daycare really is around the fact that at the end of the year, they'll start asking you about what days you need care for in the following year. So they schedule it in advance so they can do the planning. So have some knowledge about in advance what your needs will be the following year so you can get convenient days and adequate coverage for your needs.
Yep, great. So then your kids are finishing up at daycare or at kindergarten, and you start the transition to primary school. So it's, into the mainstream school. And in some ways, the logistics get way more complicated. I know lots of people really relish the idea of their kids moving to primary school because it's so much cheaper. But the
Yes.
reality is daycare is designed for workers and school is not designed for workers. So
yeah, this is where that work-life balance, family routines juggle thing gets next level because school finishes at 3:30. And if you're working, you don't if you're working full time. So suddenly you're like, sorry, how does society function properly when all these kids are free at 3:30 and someone's got to look after them? It's still one of those societal things that we haven't quite cracked. But yes, you need to think about how your life admin is streamlined because this is actually the larger transition.
Yeah, and I think this is the key one is the schedule and thinking about the schedule of who's doing drop-offs and pickups and which days the kids are going to before and after care is kind of critical. But before all of that, you really need to be thinking about which school you're choosing. So in the years leading up to it, finding out about enrolment dates and zoning. You can actually enroll from the second term of the year before start. And so then you can know which school your child's going to so that can really help with planning the transition.
You're going to need a copy of their birth certificate. You're going to need any health and welfare information that the school needs to know about, any diagnostic reports, family court orders, all of that kind of stuff. So hopefully you'll have that in your cloud storage and you can print out or send digital copies depending on their systems.
Yeah, and I think it's also a good time to start being a little bit more selective about play dates and thinking about, trying to foster the friendships with the kids who might be going to the same school as you and thinking about prioritizing those and scheduling those in. That can be a good idea to add that to your reference list or your checklist as you sort of hear about which kids are going where so that you can, keep that in mind as you're planning birthday parties and things like that.
Now, I don't know if this was just me, Dine. I'm kind of curious how you approach this, but one of the things I was freaking out most about when the kids were starting primary school was the need to make a lunchbox every freaking day. That blew my mind because they both went to a daycare where they provided all the meals. And I was thinking, how am I going to have, the time to make a lunchbox every morning? It didn't seem like there was going to be enough time. And the ideas of providing something yummy and different every day. Because some kids are happy to have the same thing every day. Those are not my children. So I ended up putting a matrix on the fridge with the 5 days of the week. And there was the kids' lunchboxes had 5 different compartments. And I'd look at those compartments and think, what am I putting in all those compartments? And so I had here's going to be the fruit, this will be the vegetable, this will be the sandwich or the crackers, this will be the protein, this will be the sweet treat. And I made my little matrix and timetable so I could just go, okay, Monday, we're having an apple and we're having some chopped up celery and blah, 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 blah. So I didn't have to think about it. And so I knew what to buy because this was new territory. What did you do? Was this an issue for you?
So I feel like this is where I've never really got caught up in that. And I'm just I've been quite tough on my kids when it comes to food. And I'm like, if you don't eat it, you'll be hungry. I have a much more simplified approach to
I had fussy eaters.
Lunches. Yeah. I think I just haven't allowed mine to be fussy because they'd either starve, I think, is the solution. So I think I've tried to keep it really simple. I did for a very long time, though, make lunches the night before. We had a lot of complexity to get out the door in the morning. So making lunches the night before, at least, 80% of it, there might have been one thing that needed to be made, but having it made and in the fridge really took the stress off the mornings for me. So thinking about your own morning and how early you're going to have to get out the door, I think really can help dictate. And I used to do the lunches as I was cleaning up from dinner. So then it would all be done and then I could actually sit down and relax. So,
Yeah. Some meal planning might need to happen here to think about what you're going to give them, and then some batch cooking. I used to batch cook some muffins. Well, that's the only batch cooking I did when it comes to lunch boxes. But depending on what your kids like to eat, doing some of that batch cooking and having things ready to go so that it can be very automatic in the mornings is key. I just made mine in the mornings when I'm making breakfast. And now, it's kids don't have to be that old before they can start making their own lunch boxes, or at least putting in some of the elements of it. Encourage that as early as possible.
Definitely.
One other thing to practice when kids are heading off to primary school for the first time is how long it takes to get to school. So if you're going to be walking or biking or driving, you want to do that route a few times beforehand so you actually know how much time you have in the morning to get there.
Yeah, and I think the reality is it takes a lot longer during the school drop-off time because the traffic, the people can be many more. So thinking about if you can, doing it, the year before, we're in lockdown at the moment still, so there is no school.
Go and get your 10,000 steps.
I think that's also an opportunity, if you can, to explore the school grounds with your child, particularly on the weekends, so that they can get more familiar with, the size and scale, the exact locations where you might be picking them up, because often there's different things if you're, picking them up at a drive-by pickup zone versus, if you're walking in person, explaining and giving really clear names, like this is South Gate or this is whatever gate, so that they know when you talk about, I'm going to pick you up at that gate today. And if they're going to go to after school care, make sure they know where it is, so which room it will be in, so that they're really familiar about where they're going to have to go to, although they'll usually get taken there. Just any of that, taking the stress or anxiety off that process can really help.
What's your recommendations around uniforms and shoes and the stuff they might need?
I really think that the first time you buy the uniform, there's two things. You want to do it in person because you want to actually try it on, because the sizing, you don't want it to be absolutely swimming, and you don't want it to be, so it's about, getting it big enough that they can grow into it, but not like 27 sizes too big.
And school uniforms are notorious for just having wacky sizing. Like
they are.
You buy like a size 4 and it's coming down to your child's like calves. You're like, what the hell? So you need to go and hold things up and see if you can try things on if possible.
Yeah, but before you do that, you'll get given this uniform list, right? And I think this is where you need those informal comms networks to say, do I actually need everything that's on this list? Do the kids actually wear this of the school uniform? Because understanding that maybe the girls at that school don't wear the trousers, or they all do wear the trousers, or they all wear, and they're often the uniforms, there's so many choices. And obviously your child's preference will be important, but it will also be driven by what a lot of the other kids do. So understanding what the other kids do will help you really decide how many of a particular item you might want to buy. If actually most kids don't wear the dress, then you might want to buy one dress, don't buy 5, because you don't want to be stuck with uniforms you're never going to use.
And depending on your school, so state primary schools, they'll have a preferred supplier. But if you wander around Target, you might see the exact same uniforms available there. So have an understanding of how strictly they need to wear the uniform from the preferred supplier versus getting potentially cheaper options at Target or elsewhere. Because if they're just wearing navy blue shorts and a navy blue polo or whatever it might be, there's a lot of places where you can pick that up. And same with the socks. They've always got their preferred, the preferred supplier will have some 6-pack of socks. You probably can find some white socks elsewhere, or blue socks or grey socks or whatever it is they're wearing. So understand with those informal networks where else you might find bits of that uniform. And the shoes.
But actually before we move on to shoes, secondhand uniforms is also a thing. So I think finding out that your school might have a secondhand uniform shop, so there might be an option, a formal option, but there also might be an informal option. Lots of parents set up those sort of buy, swap, sell kind of groups. So that's where that informal comms network comes to the fore, because you might even be able to find things for free. Often people will donate. And understanding what the secondhand uniform marketplace is like for your school is great, because then you know what to do with your old uniforms, where you're going to move them on. So having that decluttering mindset right from the beginning, I know where I'm going to be able to put this uniform when my child grows out of it.
Yeah, beautiful. Our school once a term has a secondhand uniform sale, and they just stand out front of the school. They put up some trestle tables and sell everything for $5, regardless of what it is. The top, shorts, jacket, hat. it's all $5. So it makes it pretty simple.
And I think my other tip for the uniform is make sure you've got at least 2 hats, because most schools have the no hat, no play rule, and your child will lose their hat. And even the most organised child will likely lose their hat.
Yeah.
So having a spare one that you can whip out, even if it's a second-hand, really cruddy one, so that your kid doesn't get stuck in the classroom at lunchtime simply because they don't have a hat.
Yeah, and obviously label them because they all have the same hat. And if you want to sew on something to make it look a little distinctive so your child can find their hat quickly and someone else is less likely to grab it, they're all great options.
Yeah, we did talk about it briefly before, but label. And I think for primary school, the thing that I have found the most effective is just permanent marker in nice big writing rather than anything fiddly sewed on or stamped or anything. Permanent marker is, to me, the simplest go-to.
We all start out ordering those cute labels. Let's face it. We all buy the cute labels that you can iron on and then you can stick on. They have cute little elephants and monkeys and whatever on them, and they're cute. And then you just buy a Sharpie.
And you cross off the name of the kid before and put your own name on.
And if you are ordering labels, if you have more than one child, you might just want to have the label be your surname. If you have a distinctive enough surname and there's not going to be like 10 Joneses or whatever, if you can get away with just doing the surname, then you can use the same label for all of the kids, and it has more longevity.
And it's great for things like lunch boxes too, because sometimes the kids might have a lunchbox that they both can use. So I think having the surname is great. I also we have the labels with just the surname, and I even put them on plates and things. If you go to someone's house for dinner and you all take a plate, I often put my sticker on the bottom. So then if I forget to take it home, they know who it belongs to.
Bonus tip.
Yeah, there you go.
All right, shoes. There's a temptation if you're buying special shoes for them to wear, especially if they have to wear proper school shoes. There's a temptation to buy them at the last minute so that you get maximum longevity out of them in terms of their growth. Do not do this.
No, definitely don't. Make sure that you plan to do that. First of all, find out what sort of shoes is the go at your school. So interestingly, my primary school, they say they have to wear school shoes, but no one does. Everyone wears black runners. So I went and bought my kids school shoes, and then they just languished at the back of the cupboard because they didn't wear them. So first of all, find out if you need them. Yeah, and then if you are going to buy them, make sure you buy them early enough that your size is available, because there's a massive rush off on school shoes late January in the style you might want. So go early. I would actually say December would be my go-to, and then give them lots of opportunity to wear them in so that they're not having blisters and sore feet on the first week of school. That's the last thing they need.
Yeah. You're also going to need to buy a lunchbox, or there'll be a stationery list that you have to source. They'll usually have a preferred stationery supplier. At Officeworks, again, the informal parent network might say don't actually do it through the official stationery supplier. It's much cheaper to go elsewhere. Or vice versa. They might say, it's just so convenient to stick to the school supplies one. Just do that and save yourself the drama. Lunchboxes are another area where you need to do a little bit of planning, because there is a rush. They do sell out. If your kid has a preferred style and must have the latest unicorn purple thing from Smiggle, or if they're happy with something that's sold at Coles or Woolworths that you can replace, because you're going to be replacing bits of it potentially for the next 12 years, have a talk, experiment with things. You've probably already been using various containers and things to carry around snacks, because we're always carrying around snacks for our children. But think about what's going to be washed easily, what's going to survive, what you can put a label on, what's going to be easy to prepare.
Definitely. Okay, primary school over. Moving on to the final stage, high school. This is where I am right now, and you can probably hear the anxiety in my voice.
Whose idea was this episode? Dinah's.
Yeah. So I have already set up my checklist of all of the things that I guess I'm thinking about. And, right at the top there is thinking about the complicated transport logistics. So for most kids, their high school is much further from home than their primary school. So often there'll be either, some public transport involved, or a school bus, or, more complicated logistics in terms of parents driving them. So thinking about that super early. For my daughter, we actually used public transport when we went to all the orientation days. So rather than me drive her there, I took the extra time to go with her so that she was really feeling quite comfortable by the time it came time for her to go on public transport. So I think really planning ahead makes a big difference there.
And really, that how are they going to get to school question comes up right when you're thinking about where are we going to enroll, like, that decision. So with secondary school, you need to enroll the child by April or May of their final year of primary school. So it is quite a long lead time. If you're sending your kid to an independent school or a private school, you probably registered them at birth or something. There's a long waiting list for independent private schools. So you've probably done that years before. But yes, have a think about how they're going to get there and start practicing how to get there.
Yeah. So right from the beginning, you need to get your kids understanding the schedule, and it just starts right from the beginning when they're going to have to go to orientation days, but also getting them really familiar with the idea that their schedule is going to change and that they're going to be moving between classes. And often they're going to need to start thinking about their afternoon schedule a lot more, because usually the homework really picks up when it gets into high school. So thinking about in that year before, setting up where they're going to do homework so that they're really familiar with that, and that you've started to plan what the new afternoons are going to look like, so that it's not such a big change when they start.
And usually those transition programs and orientation programs, they'll start during grade 6. If you're in states where high school starts in grade 7, then in grade 6, they're going to start doing some of those transition and orientation programs. Or if you're in states where high school starts in year 8, they'll do that in year 7. So again, these are things that are going to need to go into their schedule.
Yep. We've already talked a lot about uniforms, but what we do know is there's loads more pieces of the uniform usually when you're in high school, because often they're changing a lot more into sport uniforms. There might be, other pieces of the uniform. So really getting your kids understanding all the pieces that they have and what they might need to wear and what they might need to take and how you're going to store them, and have a system for them remembering when they need to take sport uniform, when they might need to take bathers, etc. Really important to make it super easy for the organisation, and giving them the tools to start to take on that area of the life admin, so that you're not the one who's looking at their timetable and reminding them when they have to take their sport uniform, but also setting up a system, particularly in those early days, that you're sort of their backup reminder system. So setting them up for success rather than, just letting them fail.
Yeah. It is the moment, really, isn't it? Just have them sort of step up into being more advocates for their own time. And that extends into thinking about the routines before school and after school. So there is the homework, and there's the hobbies and the sport, and they've got to have relaxation time, and they've got to think about their bedtime, because their days are going to be very full and they're kind of a little bit more in control. So it's worth having those conversations and doing some of that planning. And that also thinking about those first few weeks, if they are traveling home from school by themselves, and depending on what the adults in the house are doing, it might be useful for an adult to be home, so that when they arrive home, there's a grown-up home to greet them and kind of check in and connect and see how they're traveling. So have a think about how that affects your schedule if you're working out of the home at that time.
And we have already talked about it, but I do think it's a reminder that the technology really picks up in high school. So having a system for the passwords that your child's really familiar with before they start school. It's really fascinating that the school doesn't really seem to help out much there. So helping them along so that they don't lose passwords. And I think the other thing in terms of technology, often it's the time when we give our kids their first mobile phone. So thinking about giving them the phone maybe at the beginning of grade 6 or halfway through grade 6 or whatever. So they've got some time to get used to it, get over the novelty of it. So it's one less thing that's new when they've got so many other new things going on.
Yeah. Oh, that's going to be my daughter. Oh, the joy when she finally gets a phone. One thing also we talked about was the fact that lots of high schools have cafes. They've got their own tuck shops or cafes where kids can buy lunch. And some of them are cashless, right?
Yeah, so often they're cashless. So either setting your kid up with a debit card so that they can use their own debit card to if you allow them to have, lunch orders once a week, it might move on to, rather than being the parent's responsibility, the kids can line up and buy their own lunch. Or they might have some other online system. So making sure that you've got that set up, even if you don't intend to use it, because you just never know. The kid might forget their lunch one day and you might want to just bail them out that one time, and I certainly have bailed out my daughter once when she accidentally left her lunch in the car. She'd remembered to pick it up, but she'd left the lunchbox on the back seat. So, the fact that I'd already set up the online system so she could go to the tuck shop and buy something to eat rather than having to beg off her friends, I think is, it's good to have that backup ready to go.
Dine, what was your favourite thing to buy at our school tuck shop?
I used to love those wholemeal rolls with peanut butter and honey.
Oh,
remember that?
Really? No.
Yes. What did you used to buy?
Oh, I was all about the pies and the sausage rolls.
I just remember lining up in that wind tunnel, dark wind tunnel.
It was a cruddy little tunnel. And those apple slices, they had these apple slices with the white icing on them. Remember them?
Apple cakes.
That is all I remember. I'm sure they sold all sorts of other healthy things. That is all I ever bought.
I never really bought anything. My parents wouldn't let me have anything from the tuck shop.
So we will have linked to some resources in the show notes. We found the Raising Children website, the government parenting website, incredibly helpful. They've got all sorts of articles about starting childcare, primary school and secondary school. So we'll have those links, but head there if you've got other questions.
So we hope that these hacks will make the transition to a new school for your child so much easier. Our top hacks are: you need to be aware of and manage the emotional side of the transition as well as the logistics. Your mindset is just as important as the plan. Set up your life admin foundations as soon as the admin begins, or even when your mental load starts to weigh on you. A folder in your cloud storage, a single checklist to manage all the to-dos and ideas, so you've got one central place for you and your partner to consult. And start as you mean to go on. Be intentional on agreeing how you're going to share the responsibilities for the logistics and admin from the get-go.
Thanks for listening. Show notes for this episode are available at lifeadminlifehacks.com. And if you're a fan, please subscribe and share the love and tell a friend, or review us in your podcasting app. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn.